If you consider popular perception and imagination of Africa, you would understand why these would probably dismiss as fanciful and delusive a proposition that claims 1 billion reasons to believe in Africa. Now, the Coca-Cola company, whose global advertising campaign inspired this lecture's title, would disagree with a generalized, I would say, pessimism regarding the fate and fortune of Africa. Africa, the company argues, has found the most reasons to believe. 1 billion, in fact, inspiring people to see the brighter side of a continent that's often portrayed as dark, hopeless, and stricken with disease, conflict, and poverty. Curiously, however, I find the advertisement in question to be one of the least innovative and effective, and this for 2 reasons. First, although Coca-Cola alleges 1 billion reasons, in fact, it offers no more than a handful, and they include music, dance, mobile phones, beauty pageant, Nelson Mandela, etc. And second, the colorful 1 billion reasons billboard planted strategically across cities in Africa present a montage of Africa that is in stark dissonance with stereotypical imagery of the continent. Look at it this way. Smiling and well-nourished Africans in affluent, safe, and secure environment. Where in Africa, you might query? In which Africa? Africa of the BBC, Africa of the CNN, Africa of Al Jazeera, Africa of Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, Africa of M23. You see, the daily diet of headline news stuffed with plentiful servings of war, violence, corruption, rape, and similar vices from the so-called dark continent bears contrary testimony to the tantalizing promise of the 1 billion reasons campaign to lift the burden of stigma and enigma that hangs over the continent of Africa. So we could say, actually, that Coca-Cola speaks only figuratively. Yet, to claim 1 billion reasons only metaphorically is to run the risk of actually reinforcing widespread incredulity and pessimism about Africa. If in fact there are 1 billion reasons to believe in Africa, credibility demands our painstaking effort to enumerate and name them. But when you look at it, the advertisement that I have just referred to serves a useful dual purpose. Tactfully, it combines 2 vital reasons why some people still see a glimmer of hope in Africa. First, the continent's economic potential and resurgence. Imagine 1 billion people in Africa drinking a can of Coke every single day. Now that will translate to a phenomenal windfall for the Coca-Cola company. So economics resurgence. Second, it alludes to a religious idiom, belief, which for the purposes of our conversation tonight, raises the question about the status and function of religion on the continent. Of course, a religion whose spectacular growth is attested by multiple statistics. Rather than merely computing yet another fact book about Africa, my primary task this evening is to examine these two aspects critically before making them the basis of a renewed optimism and belief in Africa. Crucially, however, I would like to invite this audience to consider other aspects of the continent that hold out some potential for its future, and how, as a global community, we might engage in the birthing of what the Daily Telegraph chief foreign correspondent, David Blair, believes is, I quote, a new Africa that is slowly coming into being, end of quote. Let's begin then by going back in time. Writing in 1847 in a book titled Sierra Leone, the principal British colony on the western coast of Africa, the acting first writer to Her Majesty's Britannic Commissioners, a man named William Whittaker Shreve, offered a rather very somber account of Africa's religious identity and a frightful prognosis of Christianity's missionary adventure on the continent. According to Shreve, Africa, like all countries where Christianity has not penetrated, or where it progresses but slowly, is doomed to the darkness of pagan superstition, or of idolatrous rites, polygamy, lust, licentiousness, and all the vices. For until some great revolution in nature or some great and gradual human exertion takes place, it must ever prove the white man's grave. And truly may it be said that Africa's shores are paved with the white man's bones, and its graveyards filled with monuments of lost exertions. Now, Shreve's assessment of the fate of an entire race pivots on cliched sociological and philosophical constructs. Sadly, to this day, the colonial enterprise of myth-making and racial stereotyping continues to yield a repertoire of nicknames gratuitously conferred upon Africa. And when you look at these nicknames, without exceptions, they denote primitivity and savagery. From Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness to Henry Morton Stanley's Dark Continent, and The Economist magazine's The Hopeless Continent. This patronizing pastime of name-calling and nicknaming of Africa reinforces the stereotypical thinking embedded deeply in mythical colonial portrayal of the continent's complex identity and history. This, as I have mentioned, is what the Coca-Cola Company is inviting us to counteract with brighter and more hopeful images and narratives of Africa. Interestingly, the habit of nicknaming Africa has persisted into the 21st century, although now it has evolved into a more benign nomenclature. Accordingly, more than a century and a half after Shreve, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI coined another pseudonym for Africa. Africa, he declared, constitutes an immense spiritual lung for a humanity that appears to be in a crisis of faith and hope. Now, this flattering designation expresses an explicit belief in the capability of the religious fortunes of Africa to oxygenate a spiritually asphyxiated humanity. More importantly, the evolution of nomenclature from Shreve's white man's grave to Benedict's immense spiritual lung is symptomatic not only of the trajectory of development of religion in Africa, but also, I believe, of the historical receptiveness of the continent to change and new opportunities. Africa is not simply stuck in the past. But why? Why, we must wonder, did Benedict flatter Africa with such an affirmative appellation? Why? Here's my guess. Viewed from the perspective of religious adherence and affiliation, belief and practice, Africa clearly lies on an axis of demographic growth. Growth that has been variously characterized as astronomical, phenomenal, spectacular. The American aficionado of the Vatican, John Allen, once remarked that if I were asked to offer a history of Roman Catholicism in the 20th century in one sentence, I would reply, the center of gravity shifted from north to south. Such a shift, or incontrovertible evidence of religious growth in Africa, is then interpreted by Benedict XVI as a sign of hope for the rest of humanity. And I will spare you the detailed statistics of religious growth, but I would make this point, that Africa holds a crucial piece of the future of Christianity. Or put it differently, crucially, the future of Christianity passes through Africa. Sad to say, however, the glowing accounts of religious effervescence on the continent does contain a dark side. On account of past and recent events, and I say this without overlooking the significant contribution of Christianity to areas such as healthcare and education, for example, it can no longer be plausibly maintained that religion in Africa is nothing but a force for good. In fact, there are those like Nobel Peace Laureate Wole Soyinka, who repeatedly indicts Christianity and Islam as guilty, not merely of physical atrocities on African soil, including the enslavement of its indigents, but of a systematic assault on African spirituality in their context for religious hegemony. So, caution is advised against the temptation to trumpet statistics and demographics of religious growth as adequate and sufficient reason to believe in the pneumatic significance of Africa for the rest of humanity. As recently as the bloody siege of Westgate Mall in Nairobi, Kenya, and the brutal murder of 50 students in their sleep in Yobe, Nigeria, event after event points to the escalating bellicosity of religiosity and the emergence of sectarian cleavages in key areas of the continent. And so with frightening intensity, these cleavages have unleashed deadly religious and tribal passions in different parts of Africa, turning them into what Wole Soyinka would call a warring ground. However, this should be said. Whether in Kenya, Sudan, Tanzania, Egypt, Somalia, Mali, Nigeria, or Zanzibar, such ferocious proclivities that brutalize innocent humanity do not qualify as religion. No matter how stridently the chevaliers of religious separatism declaim the righteousness of their cause, recruit and goad others into war, and sink their flagposts deeper into the souls of Africans. You see, Soyinka is right. There is religion and there is fanaticism. And we may neither confuse nor conflate the two. What we are witnessing in Africa with increasing distress is the religious bigotry and mindless zealotry of seasoned manipulators of irrational sentiment of faith and revelers in the urge of pietistic homicide, who daily sharpen their blunt instruments of mass destruction at the clay feet of idols dressed as supreme deities. Should it surprise us then that when these deities are co-opted to lend authority to human sentiments and proclivities, humanity becomes disposable to usurpers of divine authority and custodians of mere dogma? Should that surprise us? Now, in making this assessment, it is not my intention to focus exclusively on those Kalashnikov-waving zealots clad in suicide vests at Westgate Mall or elsewhere in Africa as the sole perpetrators of sectarian violence. Not at all. Now, Emeritus Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, has described an extremist as, quote, someone who has simply fixed on a moment in the living tradition and frozen it, end of quote. There is a subtle form of extremism orchestrated by those on the continent who operate a kind of religious economy that preys, P-R-E-Y-E-S, that preys on the gullibility of desperate Africans. And so with entrepreneurial sophistication and cunning, jet-setting preachers and their army of evangelical clones have devised a brand of Christianity that spiritualizes Africa's real challenges. And little doubt exists in my mind that such spiritualization inevitably degenerates into a trivialization and instrumentalization of religion. And so, with evangelical certitude, this phenomenon evacuates concrete challenges of any real substance, while simultaneously either attributing their causes to personal failing and ancestral malediction, or presenting dubious options as the panacea for all of the continent's crises. And in the bogus exegesis of this sophisticated spiritual diagnosis, the cost of deliverance, the cost of procuring deliverance or healing, is a dose of faith wrapped in lavish monetary offerings to Africa's merchants of prosperity gospel. And here again I contend, we are witnessing a phenomenon that beggars belief and militates strongly against the development of Africa. If Benedict XVI has divined correctly the status of Africa as the lung of humanity, religious zealotry and evangelical bigotry connive to asphyxiate this lung. However, what I think this situation allows us to discover and consider seriously is another source of spiritual revivification, albeit one that has consistently been dismissed and combated by Christianity and Islam. And I speak here of the spirit of African religion. And in regard to this spirit of African religion, I make 2 points. First, with Shoyinka, but avoiding his penchant for romanticizing the phenomenon, I believe that African religion serves a critical purpose as bulwark against extremist attempt to dissolve the essence and value of religion in the pool of sectarian ideology and hypocrisy. So liberated from the zero-sum game of mutually assured destruction that often characterizes Africa's 2 dominant religions in certain places, the spirit of African religion is a vital repository of humanity that can sustain belief in the future of the continent and school its people in the art of dignified existence. And if this were not the case, then I would ask, why do Africans time and again resort to agents of their ancestral religion routinely castigated as witch doctors? My second point, a shorthand for the conceptualization of the core of African religion is the notion of Ubuntu. In its unencumbered sense, Ubuntu is a simple idea that prioritizes inclusivity over exclusivity, community over competition, hospitality over hostility, dialogue over confrontation, and respect over domination. Ubuntu means that we cannot turn our backs on anyone who genuinely wants to be a part of our community. Ubuntu, in this sense, places dialogue at the center of what it means to be fully human. It involves a future that seeks to rise above exclusion and alienation. And so in light of these 2 points, I wish to suggest that the gift of African religion lies not in the hubris of sectarianism and extremism, but in its deep wells of humanizing values, alive and active in the spirit of African religion. And here is one in a billion reasons for believing in Africa. That is, the authenticity, the authentic spirituality of this continent is a profound repository of resources for the renewal of humanity. What I am arguing here is that belief in Africa entails a commitment on our part to safeguard the spirit of tolerance and inclusivity that characterizes African religion as a global heritage in the face of the reign of sectarian terror. And consequently, as Shoyinka goes on to argue, if Africa falls to the will of the fanatic, then the insecurity of the world should be accepted as its future permanent condition. There are no other options. So much about religion on the continent. Let us now consider the second most ubiquitous reason for the newfound belief in Africa: economics. As I've already stated, if the Coca-Cola company sees 1 billion reasons to believe in Africa, such reasons cannot be detached from anticipated real or perceived economic dividend. Many experts and organizations today share this belief in the economic possibilities and potential of Africa. In 2000, the year 2000, The Economist magazine christened Africa the hopeless continent. Interestingly, however, in the intervening years that followed this stigmatization, as I would call it, the magazine has revised and reversed its appraisal of the fortunes of the African continent twice. First in 2011 and again in 2013. And in both editions of this magazine painted a picture of Africa rising, Africa aspiring to greater heights as what it calls the hopeful continent. The catalogue of signs and grounds for this unusual about turn and its measured optimism is impressive. The Economist reminds us that when we look at the continent today, drums of civil wars and conflicts are falling silent. There is labored but reassuring march towards democratization, infrastructural development of unprecedented scope, mobile telecommunication boom, rising income levels and middle class, falling disease rates, resurging life expectancy, improved enabling environment for investment and business, declining child mortality rates, growing foreign direct investment, and on and on and on. It is a dizzying accumulation of data to support the claim that Africa is the world's fastest growing continent just now, and that something fundamental has changed on the continent. Whereas in the past, expert analysis would dredge a reservoir of grim statistics to demonize Africa as a moribund continent, today, many specialist reports find reasons to lionize the continent and tout the status and significance of Africa as an unstoppable force in the phenomenal rise of the South. Now, without intending to play the devil's advocate, I think we ought not to overplay the economic condition of the continent. And here is why I choose to be somewhat parsimonious in my attitude towards glowing statistics of Africa's economic development. To put it quite simply, as I understand it, development is not a single strand. It is a multiplicity of interconnected and interacting strands relative to economic needs, political opportunities, cultural creativity, and social well-being of people. And so to rely on one strand alone is to stake our belief in Africa on a tenuous foundation, therefore making us liable for telling a single story. a single story, which is a pitfall that the Nigerian writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie incessantly warns against. And besides, the economist Amartya Sen has demonstrated convincingly the futility of relying exclusively on macroeconomics as yardstick for measuring development. If we content ourselves with judging the quality of life in Africa by statistical variables only, we run the risk of creating an economic avatar where only a few possess the means to acquire and enjoy a life of perks and privileges while expediently shielded and distanced from the daily drudgery of millions of dispossessed and impoverished Africans. For those who think only in absolute economic terms, Africa is rising. But why? Why? Why are so many young Africans fleeing a continent that we are told is among the fastest growing in the world, only for them to be washed up as thousands of corpses on the shores of Lampedusa and a corded state funeral in Sicily? Why? And so economic predictions that offer a positive assessment and project a hopeful future of Africa raise two concerns for me. First, the very visibly sparse translation of these benefits into improved standard of living for the most number of people. This reality of a gaping chasm between the rich and the poor represents a social iniquity that Paul VI decried 46 years ago in his revolutionary encyclical Populorum Progressio. The second concern for me is we may not overlook the fact that besides protestations of a genuine catalyst of belief, Africa's economic resurgence also evokes the specter of a modern-day scramble for Africa by local and international agents. Why does the rest of the world really fervently believe in the economic potential of this erstwhile hopeless continent? And who is benefiting from the continent's revival? However you look at it, whether from the east or from the west, those who profess belief in Africa under the banner of development do so on the basis of entrenched economic and geopolitical self-interest. My point is, belief in Africa comes at a price to Africans. But let me be clear. My questioning of the genuineness of the belief of the rest of the world in Africa is not to lay the blame for Africa's challenges at the doorsteps of other people. I am personally convinced of the futility of a certain brand of scholarship that narrows the analysis of Africa's challenges to a limited set of historical issues such as slavery, colonialism, and the Cold War. And now don't get me wrong. I say this without any intention of denigrating the insidious effects, both past and present, of these evil schemes on the life and psyche of Africans. But from where I stand today, I am convinced that those who make belief in Africa a difficult proposition are primarily people of our own race. I agree that the assessment of Africa's economic fortunes ought not to be disconnected from structures, such as leadership and governance, that control and allocate its dividends, which structures I shall now demonstrate surreptitiously undermine belief in Africa. I am reminded of a proverb from Benin City, Nigeria, which goes thus: the insect says it can sing and dance, but it is the chicken that prevents it from displaying its skills in broad daylight. Here's the point. Many are the homegrown agents that prevent Africa from realizing its full potential. I know of a country where only 4 out of 10 children attend school. It's called Somalia. I know of another country that holds the unenviable record of the largest number of out-of-school children, that is at 10.5 million children and counting. And that country is called Nigeria. The statistics of out-of-school children in Somalia may be excusable when you consider the prevailing conditions of instability and insecurity that has bedeviled that most failed state on the globe. But Nigeria? The difference, friends, I submit, lies in leadership, or the lack of it. This reference to out-of-school children is but one example of the calamitous consequences that the culpable ineptitude of many African leaders can have on the lot of an entire continent. Speaking of which, in fact, there is no shortage of leadership credential in Africa. Take the example of the elders, that collection of iconic global leaders who work together for peace and human rights. 2 Africans form part of this august body of 12. Another 2 Africans are honorary elders, one of whom is the world's most archetypal icon of leadership, Madiba Nelson Mandela, who coincidentally is celebrated by the Coca-Cola Company as the world's most admired person, and therefore duly recorded as one vital reason to believe in Africa. Mandela, shriveled and incapacitated by ill health and decades of struggle and sacrifice, Mandela can seem a study in undiluted selflessness, genuinely dedicated to the cause and service of humanity. A man possessed of a rare leadership DNA that seems so alien to many others who usurp exalted positions in Africa, but lack credibility, conscience, compassion, and character. This African, Mandela, stands a lone icon, a unique reason for believing in Africa. But sadly, surrounded by a cohort of charlatans parading as heads of state, presidents, and prime ministers who are so bereft of moral matter, so skilled in the art of manipulation, impunity, and kleptocracy, and possessed of a conscience so amoral, it could easily serve as substitute matter for Teflon. For such is the totality of their inulement to shame and scandal that even the minutest speck of morality struggles to stake on their conscience. The sight of socio-economic carnage and political havoc. That this group of men, they almost always are men, this group of men have visited on their respective countries beggars belief and should allow us a better appreciation of the challenge that the Mo Ibrahim Foundation faces year in, year out, trying to find a worthy honoree for its lucrative prize for achievement in African leadership. Just listen to a recent BBC headline news. For the fourth time in 5 years, the world's most valuable individual prize, the Mo Ibrahim Prize for Good Governance in Africa, has gone unclaimed. But not for want of contenders, you see. The ramification of the chronic leadership deficit that bedevils Africa are very serious and momentous. The people who govern Africa are an integral part of the continent's trials and tribulations. Now, given the widespread vacancy of credible and competent leadership, capable of driving development and transformation, the quest for a recovery of belief in Africa demands of us that we cast our gaze elsewhere, perhaps even lower. I am convinced that there exists multiple reasons for believing in Africa amongst Africa's ordinary folk, in particular its women folk. To quote the Second African Synod, women in Africa make a great contribution to the family, society, and the church with their many talents and resources. However, not only are their dignity and contributions not fully recognized and appreciated, but are often deprived of their rights. Consider, therefore, African women like Burundian Marguerite Barankitse, who has dedicated her entire life to the task of building bridges or bridging atavistic ethnic divide and reconciling mortal enemies long separated by mutual hatred, prejudice, and antagonism with compassion and with love. Look at CNN Heroes Award winner, Sister Rosemary Irumbe of St. Monica's Tailoring School, Gulu, and Angelina Athiam, also of Gulu, Uganda, who are creating new opportunities for children battered and traumatized by years of rebel insurgency and government recklessness. Look at 2013 UN Hansen Refugee Award recipient, Sister Angelique Namaika of DR Congo, whose personal and religious vocation is to rescue, rebuild, and restore the dignity of women victims of violence and war. Now, I could multiply the examples, but this crucial point about the centrality of African women to its progress and development does not stand on the strength of numbers. And I submit that Africa is worth believing in if we believe and invest in the advancement of its most underestimated and untapped resource, women. There is another demographic constituency that compels belief in Africa. By all calculations, Africa's population is youthful. The majority of its population is under 25 years old. Now, in an ideal situation, the concomitant adjectives for describing a continent with this record would include enviable, energetic, passionate, creative, vibrant, hopeful. Now, to be sure, all of these are predicated of Africa. But what should disturb global conscience is how a collusion of internal and external factors militates against this important variable of Africa's revival and survival. So against the backdrop of statistical assertion of Africa's economic rising, consider statistics that attribute the highest proportion of binge drinkers, the highest rate of youth unemployment, the lowest education intake, etc., to Africa. Now, I raise these facts not to elicit lamentation and commiseration, but to make the point that, in addition to investing in women, the long neglected investment in Africa's children and youth is a fundamental precondition for restoring belief in the future of the continent. And so, in addition to my earlier point regarding attitudes towards Africa's economic potential, this point that I'm making about investing in people raises the question of aid. Humanitarian, foreign, and investment aid. And this will constitute my final consideration. But let me be clear. It is not my intention to undertake a comprehensive analysis of the politics of aid. I only offer a brief excursus to identify some terms of the aid debate and point the way forward for Africa and its partners in aid by drawing, this time, on the tenets of Catholic social tradition. Now, when you look at this question, there are vociferous protagonists and antagonists in the frequently acrimonious debate about the perils and promises of aid to Africa. You have people, on the one hand, like Zambian-born economist Dambisa Moyo, and on the other hand, Bill Gates, the patron of global private philanthropy, who hold opposing views on this matter. Now, if we attempted to distill, their respective argumentations to very simple jingles, Dambisa Moyo's line would read, aid kills. Bill Gates would read, aid saves. Let's put polemics apart. Because in regard to development assistance, to give or not to give, that is not the question. What some development experts overlook is the simple truth that in our globalized world today, nobody succeeds alone. Communities, societies, countries develop, grow, either with the help or at the expense of others. And therefore, the crucial task is to rethink and redefine the terms of relationships that depend on the transfer of aid from one entity to another, either bilaterally or multilaterally. And here is where I believe Pope Paul VI struck the right balance when he proposed the idea of a holistic development. This is what Africa needs. Anybody who knows Africa understands that the essence of life is a vital connection between the individual, community, God, and the environment. What I previously in shorthand described as Ubuntu. You see, development is not development if it simply turns people into interesting statistics and fails to comprise what Paul VI calls, and I quote, a joint effort for the development of the human race as a whole, end of quote. So, thus stated, I believe that Paul VI also resolves the false dichotomy between development assistance and investment and trade in a manner that I believe rhymes with African sensibility when he outlined the triple obligations deriving from the principle of solidarity that must regulate relationships at communal, country, and international levels. And what are these obligations? First, the Pope argues, privileged nations must support the developmental goals of less privileged nations. Second, economic relations and transactions must be founded on equity and justice. And third, we must practice a mutually beneficial global charity that empowers all partners to give and receive, and where the progress of some is not bought at the expense of others. And so in light of the insight of Paul VI, in what concerns Africa, individuals and organizations that believe in Africa and seek to engage in transformation and development in Africa needs what I would call a refocusing of strategies and interests away from purely theoretical and technical considerations towards key principles of Catholic social tradition. And I would like to present an abridged list of these principles of Catholic social tradition relative to the subject of this lecture. And I do this in no particular order of importance. The first principle is solidarity, which I will define as a movement away from treating Africa as an object of charity, addicted to aid, towards engaging the continent as a partner. And this entails what, again, Paul VI was concerned to point out, the ethical imperative to hear the cry of our brothers and sisters and answer it together with love. Solidarity is antithetical to a mindset that would treat Africa as an arriviste, whose place at the gathering of development of peoples is conferred as a favor rather than recognized as a right. My second principle, drawn from Catholic social tradition, subsidiarity. You see, when you look at it, the life cycle of aid can be fickle, pegged as it is not only on the circumstances and dispositions of the givers, and generous as they may be, but also oftentimes implicitly on a mentality of noblesse oblige. Genuine belief in the development of Africa necessitates the empowerment of people to take charge of their future themselves in a manner that is dignified and sustainable. As the first president of the United States of America of African descent declared on his maiden presidential visit to Africa, I speak of Obama, we must start from the simple premise that Africa's future is up to Africans. The third principle, mutuality. It would be dishonest to project an exclusively altruistic motivation for believing in and engaging with Africa. Because historically speaking, nothing could be farther from the truth. For those who seek to engage in the developmental process of Africa, they must assume the courage and the conviction of critical self-interrogation, starting with the simple question, what's in it for me? It is questionable to reduce aid to disinterested transactional affairs of transfer and receipt of funds, no matter how well-intentioned, without honoring the right to give and receive, and where the progress of some is not bought, in the words of Paul VI, at the expense of others. Now, all of the foregoing presupposes a fourth and a final principle: relationality. Relationality. In the final analysis, no matter how sophisticated and efficient the measures applied to engage Africa in a process of development, the truth remains: development is about people. Development is about people, their dignity, their humanity, their rights, their values, their gifts. And as Pope Paul VI has insisted, in a language that Africa understands, people must meet people. Nations must meet nations as brothers and sisters, as children of God. And in this mutual understanding and friendship, in this sacred communion, we must also begin to work together to build the common future of the human race. Building the future of Africa is building the common future of the human race. So, let me conclude by thanking Chris Bain, Matthew Sanderson, and the entire team of sponsors and volunteers and partners of CAFOD for the invitation to deliver this prestigious lecture, and acknowledging with gratitude CAFOD's role in sustaining belief in Africa. And we just saw evidence of that in that brief video clip. A crucial task facing the continent of Africa today is how to construct an image of itself and generate an agenda of development worthy of the belief, trust, and investment of Africans and the global geopolitical fraternity. In spite of harmful stigmatization and stereotypical portrayal, Africa has defied formidable odds and demonstrated resilience and resolve, born on the courage and hope of 1 billion people. As should be clear, belief in Africa is first and foremost belief by Africans in Africa. And to pretend otherwise, I submit, is to fall prey to a self-defeatist moral alibi. Yes, the obstacles are many, and I have outlined only a few in the course of this lecture. Yet, the claim of 1 billion reasons to believe in Africa is not, as might at first be feared, simply fanciful and delusive. There is ground for a future full of hope, as promised by the Christian scripture. For a continent whose image is desecrated by conflict and poverty, chaos and crisis, it would take more than a bottle of Coke to redeem its fate, revive its fortunes, and restore its self-belief. Yet, the Coca-Cola Company, that self-appointed global purveyor of carbonated happiness, dares us, each one of us, to try. I thank you for your kind and patient attention.